Everybody, welcome to the Earliest Alert. Brian Good here. Before we get into the nuts and bolts here, the forecast ahead, I want to go backwards a bit. University of Albany in New York issued this statement that came out, this interesting graphic talking about the final forecast in the short term for Irma, how the GFS actually performed better than the Euro. And that's really true in many ways. GFS, the way it usually goes, Euro is really good at long term on figuring out something. It does pretty decent within midterm periods too. GFS is really good about sniffing out something significant coming our way, but it's really has a tendency to be way off on the details of it, on its placement and even timing. We'll get real excited about it, and then it gets kind of crazy toward the midterm period while the Euro begins to take over on a more solid idea. And then we see the GFS come back again in the short term, and the Euro, when it gets in the short term, then the Euro has a tendency to kind of waver a bit more. So it's like you have to go back and forth between different models at different time periods because different ones have their flaws and perform better than others, and it depends on the scenario that they're facing at that time to whether or not to believe it or not. So there's a science into the models themselves and trying to figure out on how to go about a forecast. Because again, these are just tools. These are not the ones that tell you exactly what the weather is going to do, because if they did that, we'd be unemployed. So, it's just interesting to see the GFS in its short-range forecast that it had did end up doing a good job on Irma's landfall point, near exact in fact, and then that more inland idea compared to what the Euro had. So that I thought was just interesting. I just wanted to share. All right, it's my little nerdy moment for the day. Let's move on, shall we? We're still dealing with Irma, so I guess we really haven't moved on much. The rain shield is now, the curl is starting to show up into southern Kentucky. So I think the core now, the center of it, if you will, is now moving into southern Kentucky because we're starting to see the deformation zone of the back edge, just like a typical low pressure. That's where it's pivoting around. These are where your better rain totals will actually be today, and I'm talking about a half inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch in some spots. This is generally light rain, just pockets of moderate rainfall, which means there will likely be at times there will be some dry slotting that will happen until this moves a little more east. But we're still seeing some decent areas of fog and light rain take place in our area. As we look to the south, where a lot of our action's coming from here in Louisville today, you can see it kind of comes and goes and filling in and fading out. But there is no blue sky here to get a chance to enjoy like yesterday, unfortunately. And when you look at the wider setup, you really get a bigger sense of how this has really stretched its legs out and become more elongated. It's not perfectly round anymore like the hurricane was. It's very much an elongated area of low pressure, kind of like that is how it looks instead of just a perfect circle. But it's kind of getting squished, if you will, because the front's coming in from the northwest, which is actually going to help move it along to the northeast. Now, tomorrow's forecast, the theme with Irma for a while has been that the southern edge has had a lot more drier air involved in it. And you notice in the back end here of Irma, there's not much in the way of rainfall, and that's why tomorrow's rain chance is lower than today's. That's because we'll be on the weaker side of this idea, and even some sun breaks could even develop. I'm just going to show you one of the high-res models on this today. Here is the RPM model. It is pretty good on initializing, but it does pick up the rain bands. Notice the temperatures just don't move much at all today. Even for tonight, areas of rain and drizzle, that will continue. And then the core at this point should already be east of us, so we'll be on the back side of it by tomorrow morning, and not as active as we head into tomorrow morning on the radar, as again we'll be on the back side of the system, but we can't run a spotty shower. Now if we get some sun breaks, you see what happens to the thermometer, just like yesterday. As expected, we jumped into the mid-70s with only some periods of sun. That's all it takes this time of the year. Still got a decent sun angle, so if we do get more breaks than expected tomorrow, then yes, we'll go 75 to 80. Right now we'll stop it at 74, and I'll let Andy and Kevin and Ryan look over things and see what they decide for the evening shows, if that needs to go up or not. But again, if we get some sun breaks, that is not out of the question. Now, let's look at our next headache, which is actually an old headache that has been around for a while, and that is Jose. Still a Category 1 hurricane, just kind of hanging out, in the Atlantic. Still going to do this little loop-de-loop. Now, yesterday we were talking about how it, still looks like it's going to curve and react to the trough come in our area next week and curve back out to sea. But then you look a little more into the details, and the models, yes, they do show that. Now, some of the models still hold on to the idea, but it will go more northwest. It's because it's slower with it. That's the reason why it wouldn't see the trough. It would sit here a little longer. It wouldn't see it, and then it would have an opportunity to go into Florida and Georgia. So, yeah, I could see why that would say that. But right now the consensus is it would see the trough and then, therefore, get pulled to the higher latitudes. Now, here's the thing. Then it gets complicated in the higher latitudes. Here's the GFS. You can clearly see where Jose is. This is the high pressure here up to the north. Now as we head into, let's see, next week, early next week, we've got Jose kind of brushing the Atlantic coast, it looks like, if it goes by that idea. And then it tries to head north, but then it sees the high, the next high begins to build in, and the high squishes it, basically. It's like, no, you are not allowed to go anywhere. And, of course, these systems, they got to find somewhere to go, so it finds the best opportunity to get away from that high, and that would be inland. And then it falls apart. That'll be around the 22nd, so a week from Friday. Long way off. That's just the one model run idea. I thought it was comical in the sense that poor Jose just doesn't get any love. Nobody knows what to do with it. Here's the Euro idea. Here's Jose here. It's a little faster with bringing it northbound. Similar idea, brings it north, but then it runs into that roadblock here where all of a sudden it's like it gets gained up here by these high pressures and the higher latitudes, and the blocking pattern results, and then it's got to find somewhere to go. And so it tries to do what the GFS says. It wants to go back inland near the 22nd. So could the GFS be onto something? Who knows? But as you can tell, all it takes is one of these models to be wrong, or both of them to be wrong, about the extent of how these highs are laid out across, and the timing of them across the northern latitudes. That will certainly affect what Jose does. And we don't have that answer yet. But I got a feeling we're going to be talking about Jose for a while if this trend continues. Here's your look at your earliest alert. It's a warm pattern, guys. We start, the last weekend here of summer coming up this weekend, and it's going to feel near hot. I don't have any 90s in there yet because I didn't foresee any 90s the rest of the season, so I may have to bite my tongue on that one and put a 90 in. I'm trying not to. But upper 80s, yeah, looks like a good bet here up for the weekend. And overall, this front Monday, Tuesday is going to kind of be a front that's going to roll off our back, so we're not really going to drop a whole lot, so we warm back up again for the final days of summer, 20th, 21st, even for the first day of fall. I think we'll be in the 80s. And then we'll get a front that could knock us down into the 70s, it looks like. But overall, it's a fairly warm pattern for the next 7 to 10 days after we get rid of Irma. We have some summertime warmth. So if you're a big fan of that, got some good news for you coming ahead there.